What is going on, everybody? So in today's video, we're going to take a look at the ISO performance of the Canon R6 Mark II. And we'll look at some different images and just see how this camera performs. And so here we are in Lightroom, and I have a bunch of landscape shots here that I captured with the Canon R6 Mark II. And then I also have these test chart images. And we'll start out by looking at these test chart shots here, and then we'll go into these landscape photos. And just so you know, these are all raw files. I haven't edited them at all. So let's go ahead and jump right into it here. And we'll just start out by looking at ISO 100 versus ISO 200. ISO 100 on the left, 200 on the right. And I'm just going to zoom in here and take a look around, looking for any noise differences. And there really doesn't seem to be a lot. I mean, that's pretty much expected at these low ISO values, and everything looks nice and clean on both of these shots here, so I don't want to spend too much time there. Let's go ahead and we'll jump up to ISO 400. So now we have 100 on the left, ISO 400 on the right, and we'll take a peek here. And again, they're both pretty comparable. It's really hard to tell the two apart here. Looking for kind of noise in this area. Just really not seeing too much. So ISO 400 is very clean on this camera. You can maybe see just a little bit of noise coming through in this color here, but it's very negligible. It's pretty much nothing. All right, let's go ahead now, look at ISO 100 versus 800. And just zoom right into these colors here. I see a little bit more noise in here, some of these colors, but it's very, it's not a big difference. A little bit more here. Let's look at this area over here. And so you can notice a little bit more noise in here versus over here, but ISO 800 is still looking super clean. All right, let's look at 1600 now. Zoom in down here. Okay, and now I'm starting to see a little bit bigger difference here in the noise. You can see in these colors. Red. Let's look at this area here. Yeah, definitely seeing more noise there. Just looking around at these different colors. So there's definitely a bit of noise, but it's still, I feel like this is still very usable ISO value with this camera. All right, let's jump up to ISO 3200 here. Okay, yeah, definitely more noise there. I can see a lot more noise in here, but it's still fairly well controlled. Definitely some more noise. So it's definitely a more noticeable difference now, but it's, like I said, it's still pretty well controlled. It's not making this image unusable in my opinion, but it is getting noisier for sure. Let's look down here. Compare these darker colors side by side. You can see more noise in here. All right, let's go up another stop. Look at ISO 6400. All right, so now we're definitely seeing quite a bit of noise here. You look kind of side by side. So the image is starting, it's not totally falling apart, but it's starting to get close to that. Definitely a lot more noise everywhere. So this is ISO 6400. This is kind of right around the ISO value where I probably would not want to shoot unless I really had to. But I think, if you did some noise reduction and whatnot in post, you could probably use an ISO 6400 image, no problem. Let's go ahead now and jump up to ISO 12800. Compare these. Now you can see a lot of noise. Just everywhere. It's still holding up some, a lot of that detail pretty well though, but it's just, everything's noisy. So I definitely wouldn't want to use this high of an ISO unless maybe there's a situation where I really had to, but for this type of stuff that I shoot, which is landscapes, generally don't ever have to use that high of an ISO. All right, and we'll just keep rolling up here. So now we're going to look at ISO 25,600. Take a look. You can see how noisy all that is. It is just, definitely unusable. Not want to use an ISO value like this. All right, we'll just keep going up just to kind of complete all the ISO values that this camera can shoot. And so if you look here now, we're at ISO 51,200. It is just a noisy mess. Noise, noise, noise everywhere. Looks like garbage. Wouldn't want to shoot that high. All right, and then the last one here, I believe this is the highest ISO value for this camera, 102,400. And it looks like I got the exposure off here, but we'll go ahead and just compare anyways. And you can see just a noisy mess. All right, anyways, let's go ahead now. We'll look at some of these more real world type shots here, these landscape shots. So we'll look at ISO 100 versus 200. We have this beautiful mountain here. And just kind of sync these up. Just kind of look around at different areas. And some of these shadowy areas, especially. Not really a big difference at all. Let's look at the sky as well. Really no discernible difference there. So ISO 200 is very, very good on this camera. Let's look at 400. ISO 100 versus 400 now. And we'll zoom in here. Let's bring these over a little bit. And it's very, very hard still to see any real noise difference. Even in the sky up here, it's really hard to tell the difference. There's maybe slightly more noise in there, but really not that much. All right, let's go ahead now, move up to 800 here. And yeah, I'm seeing a little bit of noise in here. Looks a little bit grainy there, but it's not bad. The sky, same thing, looks a little bit grainy, but it's really not that bad at all. Let's take a look down here. So I'm kind of looking at this shadow area here versus over here. And there's a little bit of noise in there, but it's totally usable. So ISO 800 is just looking really good too. So let's bump up to ISO 1600 now. And kind of just looking at these shadowy areas here. If you look at this area right here, let's just get these a little closer. Like this area here versus here, you can notice that noise in there. So this is ISO 1600 again. But overall, it still doesn't look very bad, really. A little bit noisier. You can definitely see it over in here too, but it's not that bad. It looks pretty good still. A little bit grainier looking here. Looks a lot cleaner than this guy here, but I think this is still a very usable image, especially if you use some noise reduction techniques in your post-processing. I think ISO 1600 is really no issue with this camera. All right, let's move up to ISO 3200 here. Just gonna sync these back up. All right, let's go up here. 3200. All right, so now definitely noticing a bit more noise. I'm looking at some of these areas up in here. I'll bring these closer together. So you can see a lot more noise in these darker areas here, and then these trees, pretty much all over. But it's still, I mean, obviously we're zooming in at 100% here, and it's, I mean, you have to zoom in at 100% to tell a difference, really. But if you look at the sky, you can notice a lot more of that noise in the sky. But I still feel like this would be a usable ISO value, at least for me. We all have different preferences and whatnot, but for me, I wouldn't hesitate to go to ISO 3200 on this camera. Still looks pretty good. Now, a little bit of noise in here, but still looks good overall, I'd say. All right, let's go ahead and now jump up to ISO 6400 and zoom in here. Okay, now I'm seeing quite a bit more noise all over. So, you know, this is, if you see how clean this looks here versus over in here, a lot of noise is showing up. So I would probably hesitate a bit to use ISO 6400, but I still think it's a usable ISO value, you know, as long as you apply some noise reduction and whatnot. But it's definitely a lot more noticeable, this ISO 6400. And just for fun here, let's go ahead, we'll compare ISO 3200 versus 6400. I want to see what those look like. So yeah, I'm definitely noticing quite a bit of noise. I mean, there's noise in both, but definitely noticing more in the ISO 6400 here. And that's to be expected. Same thing in the sky. Kind of looking here versus right here. All right, well, let's go ahead now. Let's go jump back to ISO 100 and we will compare that to ISO 12800. All right, so now this is just, for me, this is, I wouldn't want to go this high for sure. Yeah, it's hard to tell when you're zoomed out, but once you kind of zoom in a little bit, it's definitely looks really grainy all over, really noisy here. All right, and just for fun, I'm not going to go through all of the values again, but just for fun, I want to look at ISO 100 versus 102,400. And even at a global level here, you can just see that this is a noisy mess. But let's go ahead and zoom in. And oh man, that's that's just completely unusable. I mean, there's more. I feel like there's more noise than signal here, pretty much. Seems like, anyways. Look at that sky difference. The sky here is like blue, and it's just almost white there with noise. Anyways, all right, let's go ahead and look at these other shots here. Again, I'm not going to go through every single one, but we'll look at a few. So I'm just going to look at ISO 100. We'll jump up to 1600 here. Take a look. Let's sync these up. There we go. Yeah, it's definitely a little bit noisier here on the ISO 1600 image. Let's look up at this peak. Definitely in this area, it's a little bit harder to tell, probably because there is already so much like fine detail in here. Even in the sky, it's not really that noticeable in the sky. But yeah, I think ISO 1600 looks pretty good actually. Definitely a little bit of noise, but looks good overall, I think. All right, let's look at 3200 again. And we zoom in and we can see there's definitely more noise here. Let's look at, let's bring this out a little bit. So if you look at this line of shadow right here versus that same line of shadow here, definitely notice quite a bit more noise over here in ISO 3200. a little bit harder to notice in some of these more lit up areas. But it's definitely quite a bit noisier. But to me, this is still a usable image as long as you use some good noise reduction techniques and whatnot. All right, and we will look at ISO 6400 as well. Zoom in down here to the shadow again. Look right here versus right here. So ISO 6400 is definitely quite a bit noisier. Let's look at the sky. Definitely see that noise up there. This peak. So kind of look at the face of this peak right here versus right here. You can definitely see more noise there. But from a global standpoint, it's really hard to tell. Once you zoom in a little bit, it's pretty easy to tell at ISO 6400. All right, let's go ahead now. We'll look at the lowest versus the highest again. And it just looks like complete garbage here at 102,400. Completely not usable. But anyways, I hope that gives you guys a good idea of how this camera performs with regards to ISO. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I will see you on the next video.